Today is Palm Sunday. No, it has nothing to do with me. I just want to clear the air about that. But it is the first day of Holy Week in the Christian calendar. This is the most important week of the year for Christians, and also the week that is filled with the most tension. Palm Sunday marks the day that Jesus arrived into Jerusalem. It's said that he arrived on a donkey, symbolic of his desire to be a peaceful servant leader. He was greeted by crowds of people waving palm branches and shouting, "Hosanna," which means save us, and "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," hearkening back to one of the Psalms. As he moved through the crowd, people lay down robes and palm branches in his path, making a path for him so he wouldn't have to touch the ground, a sign that he was someone very important. Now, in the context of first century Jerusalem, the symbolism of all of this was not just religious, it was also deeply political. At the same time that Jesus was entering from one side of Jerusalem, the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, was entering from the other side. He was mounted on a war horse and surrounded by soldiers, a demonstration of the power of Rome. Pilate's entrance was designed to intimidate people and to ensure their submission. Jesus' entrance, while peaceful, was a deliberate disruption, a public demonstration of a different kind of power, the power of peace and compassion. Not the power of kings, but the power of the people. While Palm Sunday is often thought of as commemorating a procession and is celebrated by creating processions in churches, really, it was a lot more like a protest. As Anna Galladay writes, Palm Sunday then is not just a prelude to Easter, it is a protest parade, a public embodied critique of empire, a declaration that another kind of reign, a reign of justice and mercy and collective flourishing, is not only possible, it is already breaking in. Now, it all sounds to me a lot like the No Kings protest that many of us attended yesterday. In fact, one of my Christian colleagues was planning to hand out palm fronds to folks from her congregation who were going to the protest, a nod to Jesus' rejection of the power of empire and intimidation. Perhaps the very first No Kings protest was actually not last year, but 2,000 years ago. Now, there has been a lot of debate in progressive circles about whether these mass public protests are even useful. You sometimes hear people refer to them as performative or a waste of time and energy. But the research shows that sustained mass demonstrations work. Political scientist Erica Chenoweth claims that it takes only 3.5% of the population actively participating in a nonviolent movement to create change. 3.5%. She also found that it was nonviolent movements that were twice as likely as violent ones to produce the desired change. She cites the people power movement in the Philippines in the 1980s, where millions of people took to the streets in Manila, and the reigning regime folded in just 4 days. And she talks about the Rose Revolution in Georgia in 2003, where protesters took over the parliament building with roses in their hands, forcing the head of state to resign. These are just a couple of the many examples Chenoweth found in her research of the power of nonviolent resistance. Chenoweth's research showed that any time 3.5% of the population became an active part of the movement, success was not only possible, it was inevitable. Now, even Chenoweth herself says that she was surprised by the results of her research. But as she dug more into the various movements, it became clear that there are a number of reasons nonviolent movements work better than violent ones. They are able to attract a wider variety of people and have fewer physical barriers to participation. They're easier to speak about openly, meaning word can spread quickly. They're more likely to win support from police and military forces, the ones tasked with keeping order. Maybe they worry that their own friends and family are in the crowds, or maybe, as Chenoweth puts it, when they're looking at the sheer numbers of people involved, they may just come to the conclusion that the ship has sailed, and they don't want to go down with the ship. But when it comes down to it, the reason that mass nonviolence resistance works is all about tension. It's about building tension, creating enough tension and discomfort that those in power can no longer stand it. That Palm Sunday procession 2,000 years ago certainly made Pontius Pilate uncomfortable. He saw the power that Jesus had over people, the way he motivated people to action, and he felt threatened by it. No one had even lifted a finger towards him, and yet he could tell that Jesus' influence was undermining his authority. The people who Jesus' message spoke to most were those with the very least power in Roman-occupied Jerusalem. They were the ones who had been suffering for years, left behind, rejected, and oppressed by the imperial power. They had been living with the tension and were sick of internalizing it. It sounds, again, a lot like the people who have been showing up for the No Kings protests. We are sick and tired, right? We are sick and tired of living in fear, of having our neighbors disappear, of wondering which of our rights will be rolled back next. We're sick and tired of our tax dollars funding war and genocide, of watching billionaires get richer and richer as inflation continues to skyrocket and wages continue to stagnate. People are showing up in the streets because we're no longer willing to hold that tension inside ourselves, and we want the people in power to feel it instead. As Adrienne Maree Brown says, when you feel like the only option is to internalize the tension, then that is actually not a sustainable relationship. Because what you are having to do to yourself is so damaging. So let the tension be between you and other people and see what happens. You may say that right now, the relationship between the people and our government is not a sustainable relationship. This is also what Jesus' ministry encouraged people to do, to start to believe that another world was possible, that they could have power. And so they began to nudge that tension toward where it belonged, waving palms in the street, making Pontius Pilate feel the heat instead. This is how all community organizing works. Identifying the pressure points in a community where people are feeling the most tension in their lives, and then channeling that into putting the pressure on the people in power with the power to make change. Brown says that there's a tendency for the people without power, without privilege, the people with the least privilege, to be the ones who are holding the most tension. And so it is that our movements for justice have to try to reverse that, to put the tension back on those with power to change things. As she says, when we don't speak up, we are participating in our own oppression and repression. And I would add that we are participating in the oppression and repression of those people who have less power than us as well. We are allowing that tension to be held within us rather than putting it out into the open where it belongs. Mass movements for social change are all about building that tension in public, making it impossible for those in power to comfortably stay there. And we know from experience that this works, right? We have seen this right here in southern New Hampshire in the last month. It is not just theory. From the moment that people heard about the proposed ICE facility in Merrimack, there was tension, right? People were scared about what it would mean for our communities, for Merrimack and beyond. They were outraged that the government wanted to build a warehouse for humans. And they were horrified about what they saw happening in Minneapolis and terrified that we would be next. And so instead of internalizing that tension, people organized. People showed up and spoke out. They put the pressure first on town officials in Merrimack, then on our governor. In 2 weeks, over 8,000 people signed a letter to the governor asking her to stop the detention center. At that final protest against the facility in Merrimack, 1,500 people showed up with plans to show up again a week later in Nashua. But just a few days after that protest, the governor announced that the plans for the facility had been canceled. Now, the population of Merrimack is just 28,000. So 1,500 people is over 5% of that. When just 3.5% of the population gets together in sustained mass nonviolent resistance, success is inevitable. Now, I don't know exactly what was going through our governor's brain when she finally decided to do something about the proposed detention center, but I have to imagine that she saw how many people showed up, she heard how many people wanted the detention center defeated, and she felt the pressure. She knew the tension was building and it would only continue to build until she started to listen. I imagine she was also thinking about the fact that this is an election year. The truth is, as much as our leaders might like us to forget it, we have power, right? We have the power to be agents of change if we are ready to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. True change requires tension. It is not easy to hold that tension for long enough for the change to happen, and it is rarely comfortable. But I believe that that is what this moment demands of us. That is what our values as Unitarian Universalists demand of us. We have to keep pushing, keep fighting for ourselves and each other, keep showing up for our neighbors and for our country. I know we're tired, but the tension is building. Perhaps that new world is just about to be born, and there is no going back now. These words that Valerie Kaur, a Sikh activist, wrote almost 10 years ago still ring true today. She says, "What if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a country that is still waiting to be born? What if the story of America so far is one long labor? What if all the mothers who came before us, who survived genocide and occupation, slavery and Jim Crow, racism and xenophobia and Islamophobia, political oppression and sexual assault, are standing behind us now, whispering in our ear, 'You are brave'? What if this is our great contraction before we birth a new future? Remember the wisdom of the midwife, says Kaur. breathe, she says, then push. We are agents of change, birthers of a new world, builders of a better tomorrow. And yesterday we pushed. Today we breathe and we sing and we get ready to do it all again. May we never stop pushing until that new world arrives.